The most dangerous mistake you can make is believing you already know who someone is. The afternoon sun reflected off dozens of parked cars as curious shoppers drifted toward the growing crowd outside a busy shopping plaza less than 20 miles from Fort Liberty. Cell phones were already pointed toward the center of the commotion, where a white police officer stood beside a dark blue luxury sedan with flashing patrol lights illuminating the pavement. Officer Daniel Mercer wore the confident expression of a man who believed he had complete control of the situation. In front of him stood a tall black man in a neatly pressed navy business suit, his hands visible, his posture calm, and his voice steady despite the attention surrounding him. His name was Nathaniel Brooks, although nobody watching recognized it. And at that moment, nobody imagined they were looking at someone whose decisions affected thousands of American soldiers. To every passerby, he appeared to be another driver having a difficult encounter with law enforcement. Mercer looked at the small gathering before turning back toward Nathaniel. "You have had more than enough chances to explain yourself," he said firmly. "Right now, you are being detained until I finish this investigation." Nathaniel never raised his voice. He never argued. He simply nodded once as though he had spent a lifetime refusing to let another person's emotions become his own. The silence unsettled several people watching because it did not match the confrontation they expected. A younger officer, Ryan Collins, remained several feet away, carefully observing every exchange while occasionally glancing toward the documents resting on the hood of the patrol vehicle. Nothing he had seen so far seemed to justify the growing tension, but Mercer appeared determined to prove that his instincts could not possibly be wrong. More people stopped as they walked past. Some whispered to each other. Others quietly began recording. A mother gently pulled her young son closer while an older couple exchanged uncertain looks, wondering why the well-dressed man remained so composed despite clearly being the center of unwanted attention. Nathaniel slowly looked around at the crowd before returning his attention to Mercer. "Officer," he said in an even tone, "I have cooperated with every instruction you have given me." Mercer folded his arms. "That is not the issue anymore." Nathaniel paused for a brief moment before speaking again. "Then I have only one request." Mercer stared at him without responding. "I would like to make one phone call." A faint smile crossed Mercer's face, not because he found the request amusing, but because he believed it would change absolutely nothing. "One phone call is not going to solve your problems," he replied. Nathaniel's expression remained unchanged. "Perhaps not mine." The answer lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Ryan Collins looked toward Nathaniel with quiet curiosity, sensing there was meaning behind those four simple words. Mercer dismissed the comment with a wave of his hand and instructed Collins to continue documenting the stop while he spoke with dispatch once more. Around them, more cameras appeared. The crowd had stopped wondering whether something unusual was happening. They now sensed they were witnessing the beginning of a story that would become far bigger than a routine police stop. Nathaniel glanced once toward the clear Carolina sky before lowering his eyes again, showing neither fear nor frustration. He patiently waited, knowing that within minutes one decision would begin a chain of events that nobody standing on that street was prepared to witness. 6 hours earlier, the same Carolina sky had looked peaceful as Nathaniel Brooks guided his dark blue sedan along Interstate 95 toward Fort Liberty. Morning sunlight stretched across the highway while a steady stream of commuters headed toward nearby cities, military installations, and small towns scattered across the region. Nathaniel drove with the quiet confidence of someone who had followed disciplined routines for decades. A neatly pressed navy business suit rested comfortably beneath his seatbelt, and a leather portfolio occupied the passenger seat beside him. Inside were carefully organized notes for an afternoon leadership address that had been scheduled for months. Every page reflected the same philosophy that had shaped his entire career. Leadership was measured by service, not by status. He glanced briefly at the dashboard clock before calculating that he still had plenty of time to arrive comfortably before the ceremony. Rather than rushing, he preferred arriving early enough to greet younger officers and enlisted soldiers personally. Those conversations often mattered far more than the speech itself. As the fuel gauge approached 1/4 of a tank, Nathaniel exited the interstate and pulled into a busy service station located only a few miles from Fort Liberty. Families filled their vehicles before weekend trips, delivery drivers hurried between stops, and several construction workers chatted while waiting inside for fresh coffee. Nothing about the ordinary scene suggested that the day would soon take an unexpected turn. Nathaniel filled the tank, stepped inside the convenience store, and purchased a bottle of water before politely thanking the cashier and wishing her a pleasant afternoon. She smiled, noticing his calm manners and professional appearance, then watched as he returned to his vehicle and continued toward the highway. A few minutes later, traffic became lighter as the road passed through a commercial district lined with restaurants, automotive shops, and grocery stores. Nathaniel maintained the posted speed limit, keeping both hands comfortably on the steering wheel while soft classical music played through the speakers. His thoughts remained focused on the soldiers waiting at Fort Liberty rather than on himself. He quietly reviewed the opening lines of his remarks, reminding himself to emphasize responsibility, humility, and respect for every person regardless of rank. Behind him, another vehicle entered the roadway before gradually closing the distance. Nathaniel barely noticed the patrol car until flashing blue lights suddenly reflected across his rearview mirror. Without hesitation, he activated his turn signal, slowed carefully, and guided his sedan into the parking lot of a nearby shopping plaza to avoid obstructing traffic. He shifted into park, lowered his driver's side window, turned off the engine, and placed both hands where they would remain clearly visible. Years of experience had taught him that calm cooperation often prevented unnecessary misunderstandings. He reached slowly toward the glove compartment only after deciding to wait until instructed, choosing instead to remain completely still. The patrol vehicle rolled to a stop several feet behind him. Officer Daniel Mercer stepped out with measured confidence, adjusted the camera attached to the front of his uniform, and walked toward the driver's side while studying Nathaniel through the open window. From the very first moment their eyes met, Nathaniel sensed that this conversation was unlikely to resemble an ordinary traffic stop, although he could not yet know how one routine encounter would soon place both men at the center of a story that neither of them would ever forget. Officer Daniel Mercer stopped beside the open driver's side window and studied Nathaniel Brooks for several long seconds before speaking. His expression suggested he had already reached conclusions that no conversation was likely to change. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," he said in a firm voice. Nathaniel nodded politely. "Yes, officer." He moved slowly, exactly as requested, retrieved each document without sudden movement, and handed them over with both hands clearly visible. Mercer barely glanced at the paperwork before shifting his attention back toward Nathaniel. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Nathaniel answered calmly. "No, sir. I believed I was driving within the posted speed limit." Mercer replied, "You changed lanes without signaling soon enough, and your driving pattern caught my attention." Nathaniel accepted the explanation without argument. "I understand." Mercer looked once more at the license in his hand, then back at the luxury sedan, allowing an uncomfortable silence to linger. "Where are you headed?" Nathaniel answered honestly. "Fort Liberty." "Business or personal?" Mercer asked. "Business." "What kind of business?" Nathaniel paused briefly before replying. "I have a professional commitment there this afternoon." The answer seemed to irritate Mercer more than satisfy him. "That is not very specific." Nathaniel remained respectful. "It is all I am able to say at the moment." Mercer narrowed his eyes. "Step out of the vehicle." Without hesitation, Nathaniel unfastened his seatbelt, stepped onto the pavement, and quietly closed the driver's door behind him. Officer Ryan Collins had now approached from the passenger side and accepted the documents Mercer handed him. As Collins reviewed the driver's license, vehicle registration, and insurance card, nothing immediately appeared unusual. The registration matched the vehicle identification number. The insurance was active. The driver's license was valid. Collins quietly checked the information through the patrol computer while Mercer continued questioning Nathaniel. "How long have you owned this vehicle?" Mercer asked. "Several years," Nathaniel answered. "Paid for?" "Yes." Mercer slowly circled the sedan before stopping beside the rear bumper. "Interesting." Nathaniel waited patiently without responding. Collins looked up from the computer screen. "Everything is coming back valid," he said quietly enough that only Mercer could hear. Mercer frowned. "Run it again." Collins repeated the search, carefully confirming every detail a second time. Once again, the results remained unchanged. Valid driver's license. No warrants. No alerts. Proper registration. Current insurance. Collins looked uncertain. Everything checks out. Mercer accepted neither the report nor the implication behind it. Instead, he continued searching for reasons to justify the stop. What exactly do you do for a living? Nathaniel answered with the same measured tone. I serve the United States. Mercer gave a skeptical smile. Doing what? Nathaniel looked directly at him. Public service. The answer sounded truthful, yet somehow incomplete, and Mercer interpreted that restraint as evasiveness rather than professionalism. Meanwhile, shoppers walking between nearby stores began noticing the unusually long traffic stop. A delivery driver slowed his van before parking several spaces away. Two college students paused outside a coffee shop, quietly wondering why the well-dressed man had been standing beside his vehicle for so long. One of them instinctively raised a phone and began recording from a respectful distance. Collins noticed the growing audience and shifted uneasily. He had participated in dozens of routine traffic stops, but this one no longer felt routine. The paperwork revealed nothing suspicious. Nathaniel had followed every instruction without hesitation, and yet Mercer appeared more determined with every passing minute to prove that his first impression had been correct. Nathaniel simply folded his hands in front of him and waited in complete silence, sensing that the encounter was no longer being driven by evidence, but by assumptions that facts alone might not immediately overcome. Officer Daniel Mercer slowly handed the driver's license back to Ryan Collins without taking his eyes off Nathaniel Brooks. The silence between them had become heavier than the traffic passing through the shopping plaza. Every answer Nathaniel had given was calm, respectful, and consistent, yet Mercer appeared more convinced than ever that something was being hidden. He stepped closer and spoke with deliberate confidence. You keep saying you are here on business, but you refuse to tell me exactly what that business is. That makes this situation very simple for me. Nathaniel met his gaze without the slightest sign of irritation. Officer, I have answered every question that I am authorized to answer. Mercer folded his arms. Authorized? He repeated with a skeptical laugh. Who exactly is authorizing you? Nathaniel paused before responding. That information is not mine to discuss. The answer only deepened Mercer's suspicion. He glanced toward the sedan once more before walking around it again, as though another inspection might suddenly reveal what the documents had failed to show. Ryan Collins quietly approached him. Everything has been verified twice, he said in a low voice. There are no violations showing up in the system. No warrants. No alerts. Nothing unusual. Mercer barely acknowledged the report. There is always something, he replied. People do not answer questions like that unless they have something to hide. Collins hesitated for a moment before stepping back. He had learned early in his career not to challenge a senior officer publicly, but every minute that passed made him increasingly uncomfortable. Around them, more pedestrians had stopped to watch. Several shoppers stood beneath the shade outside nearby stores while others remained inside parked vehicles with their windows lowered. Cell phones continued recording quietly. Nobody shouted. Nobody interrupted. They simply watched a traffic stop that no longer resembled an ordinary encounter. Nathaniel remained exactly where Mercer had instructed him to stand. His posture never changed. His hands remained visible. His voice stayed measured each time he answered another question. The contrast between his composure and Mercer's growing frustration became impossible to ignore. Mercer returned once more and spoke more firmly. Until I determine exactly why you are here and whether your story checks out, you are not free to leave. Nathaniel nodded once. I understand your position. Mercer seemed almost surprised by the response. He had expected resistance, arguments, or excuses. Instead, he found only patience. That patience somehow made him even more determined to prove that his instincts had been correct from the beginning. A woman standing near the entrance of a grocery store quietly asked another bystander how long the stop had been going on. Almost 20 minutes, the man answered while lowering his phone for a moment. The gentleman has not argued once. Collins heard the conversation and looked back toward Nathaniel. Everything he had observed pointed toward cooperation rather than deception. Yet the stop continued, stretching further beyond what seemed necessary. Nathaniel finally broke the silence. Officer Mercer. Mercer turned immediately. What? Nathaniel spoke with the same steady voice that had never once risen throughout the encounter. I have fully cooperated with every lawful instruction you have given me. At this point, I would respectfully like to make one phone call. Mercer looked directly into his eyes before giving a faint, dismissive smile. One phone call is not going to change where this is headed. Nathaniel's expression remained completely unchanged. Perhaps you are right, he answered quietly. But I believe it will answer every question that still remains. Ryan Collins instinctively looked from Nathaniel to Mercer, sensing that whatever happened next would determine whether this encounter ended as an ordinary traffic stop or became something that every person standing in that parking lot would remember for years to come. Officer Daniel Mercer stared at Nathaniel Brooks for another long moment before giving a slow shrug. Fine, he said. You get one phone call. It is not going to change anything, but you can make it. Nathaniel gave a respectful nod. Thank you. Mercer handed him his cellular phone after briefly confirming that it remained unlocked. Every person standing nearby watched with growing curiosity. Most expected Nathaniel to call a family member, an attorney, or perhaps a friend. No one imagined that the number he quietly entered had been committed to memory years earlier. Nathaniel held the phone to his ear while the line connected. After only 2 rings, a calm professional voice answered. Operations Center. Nathaniel spoke with the same measured tone he had maintained throughout the encounter. This is Major General Nathaniel Brooks. I need to verify my identity and report that I have been delayed while traveling to Fort Liberty. The voice on the other end immediately changed. Sir, please authenticate. Nathaniel calmly completed the requested verification without raising his voice or revealing unnecessary information. There was a brief pause before the response came back with unmistakable urgency. Identity confirmed, General Brooks. Please remain where you are. We are notifying Fort Liberty Command immediately. Nathaniel simply answered, thank you, before ending the call and returning the phone to Mercer. Mercer accepted it with an expression that suggested he had heard only another unbelievable story. A general, he said with a faint laugh. That is a new one. Nathaniel offered no reply. Mercer slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned toward Ryan Collins. People can pretend to be anybody over the telephone. Collins did not immediately answer. He had clearly heard Nathaniel identify himself, but he had also noticed something Mercer ignored completely. Nathaniel had never attempted to convince anyone. He had never argued about his position. He had simply completed what sounded like a professional verification process before quietly ending the conversation. Collins looked toward the patrol computer once more, wondering whether another database might contain information unavailable through standard traffic records. Before he could speak again, the patrol radio suddenly came to life. Dispatch requested confirmation of the unit's exact location and asked Mercer to remain on the scene until further notice. Mercer frowned. We are already here, he answered. What is going on? The dispatcher responded only that additional communication had been received and more information would follow shortly. Mercer glanced toward Nathaniel before shaking his head dismissively. Probably another misunderstanding. Nathaniel remained exactly where he had been standing, his posture relaxed and his expression unchanged. Around them, the small crowd had grown even larger. Several people who had intended only to stop for lunch now remained in place, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Ryan Collins quietly noticed a change in the atmosphere that had nothing to do with the gathering spectators. Dispatch had sounded different. The calm routine voice he heard dozens of times every week had carried an unusual level of precision, almost as though multiple agencies had suddenly become interested in one ordinary traffic stop. Mercer continued believing the encounter remained completely under his control, but Collins had begun to suspect that somewhere beyond the shopping plaza, people with far greater authority had just received a message that would soon transform an ordinary afternoon into an unforgettable lesson about assumptions, responsibility, and the importance of knowing every fact before reaching a conclusion. The next several minutes passed with unusual silence. Nathaniel Brooks remained exactly where he had been instructed to stand, his hands relaxed at his sides, while the afternoon breeze carried the distant sounds of passing traffic across the shopping plaza. Officer Daniel Mercer checked his watch, convinced that whatever phone call Nathaniel had made would soon prove meaningless. He looked toward Ryan Collins with a confident smile. People try impressive stories all the time, he said quietly. Eventually the truth catches up. Collins did not answer immediately. His attention remained fixed on the patrol radio, which suddenly came alive once again. Dispatch requested that both officers remain at their current location and advised that representatives from Fort Liberty were en route to verify information connected to the encounter. Mercer pressed the transmit button. Verify what exactly? The dispatcher replied in an unusually careful tone. We have been instructed to maintain the scene exactly as it is. Additional details will be provided by arriving personnel. Mercer lowered the radio slowly, clearly annoyed by the lack of explanation. This is becoming ridiculous, he muttered before turning back toward Nathaniel. Looks like someone managed to convince a few people to waste their afternoon. Nathaniel offered no response. He simply waited with the same calm expression that had never changed since the traffic stop began. Around them, the crowd continued growing. Curious shoppers, restaurant employees, delivery drivers, and families paused their routines as they sensed that something uncommon was unfolding. Several people quietly exchanged theories while continuing to record from a respectful distance. Ryan Collins noticed another change before anyone else. Two dark government sport utility vehicles entered the shopping plaza, followed closely by a military police vehicle displaying Fort Liberty markings. None of the vehicles activated emergency lights or sirens. They moved with quiet purpose before stopping several yards behind the patrol car. Mercer straightened his posture as several uniformed personnel stepped out. Leading the group was Colonel William Harper. He approached without speaking, first identifying himself to Mercer and requesting a brief explanation of the situation. Mercer confidently summarized the traffic stop, emphasizing that he was conducting what he believed to be a legitimate investigation. Harper listened without interruption before asking one simple question. Has the individual identified himself? Mercer nodded. He claims to be a major general. Harper looked toward Nathaniel. May I verify your identity, sir? Nathaniel reached calmly into the inside pocket of his suit jacket after receiving permission and presented his military identification. Harper examined the credentials carefully, compared them with secure information displayed on a government device carried by another officer, and waited while the final confirmation arrived through an encrypted communication. Only after every verification had been completed did Harper close the identification, return it respectfully, take one measured step backward, and render a precise military salute. Good afternoon, General Brooks, he said clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Fort Liberty apologizes for the delay in your arrival. Your staff has been informed, and all preparations have been adjusted. For several seconds, the entire parking lot fell completely silent. Mercer stared at Nathaniel without speaking, the confidence that had defined the encounter slowly disappearing from his face. Ryan Collins quietly lowered his eyes, realizing that every document he had reviewed had pointed toward the truth from the very beginning. Nathaniel acknowledged Colonel Harper's salute with calm professionalism before speaking in the same steady voice he had used throughout the afternoon. Thank you, Colonel. Before we leave, I believe it would be appropriate for every fact surrounding today's encounter to be documented accurately. Harper nodded once. It already will be, sir. At that moment, Mercer finally understood that the most important part of the afternoon was no longer the traffic stop itself, but the complete record of every decision that had led to it. Edit. Colonel William Harper lowered his salute and turned toward the small group that had gathered around the patrol vehicles. His expression remained calm, but the professionalism in his voice left no doubt that the situation had entered an entirely different stage. No one is making conclusions. Today, he said evenly, we are preserving facts. Nathaniel Brooks gave a slight nod of agreement. That is all I have asked for from the beginning. Officer Daniel Mercer remained silent. Only minutes earlier, he had controlled every conversation on the scene. Now he found himself listening as others carefully documented each step that had taken place during the encounter. Ryan Collins stood quietly beside the patrol vehicle, replaying the entire stop in his mind. Every instruction Nathaniel had received had been followed without hesitation. Every document had been valid. Every answer had been respectful. The evidence had been available almost immediately, yet assumptions had continued driving the encounter long after the facts should have settled it. Another government vehicle entered the shopping plaza. A middle-aged official wearing business attire stepped out carrying a secure document case. Colonel Harper greeted him with a brief handshake before introducing him to Nathaniel. Sir, this is Inspector David Monroe from the Department of Defense Inspector General. Monroe acknowledged Nathaniel respectfully before addressing everyone present. Our responsibility today is simple. Every piece of available evidence will be preserved exactly as it exists. We are interested only in the complete sequence of events. He requested copies of the body camera recordings, patrol vehicle dash camera footage, dispatch communications, and the timeline generated by the patrol computer. A police supervisor who had just arrived agreed immediately and instructed department personnel to secure every digital record without alteration. Nearby witnesses were politely asked whether they had recorded any portion of the traffic stop. Several individuals volunteered their videos without hesitation, explaining that they had begun recording only because the encounter had continued for so long despite the driver's obvious cooperation. Inspector Monroe thanked each of them, carefully noting the time each recording had begun. Ryan Collins was then asked to provide his own account. He answered honestly, explaining that the driver's license, registration, and insurance had all verified successfully during his first review and again during the second. He also confirmed that Nathaniel had remained respectful, cooperative, and compliant throughout the entire stop. Collins spoke without criticizing anyone. He simply described the facts exactly as he remembered them. Nathaniel listened quietly without interruption. When Inspector Monroe finally asked whether he wished to add anything, Nathaniel answered with remarkable restraint. I believe every profession earns public confidence when its members are willing to examine difficult moments honestly. I am interested in accuracy, not embarrassment. The statement seemed to settle over the parking lot with unexpected weight. Even several bystanders lowered their phones, recognizing that the conversation had become less about one officer and more about accountability itself. Mercer looked briefly toward the crowd before lowering his eyes. The confidence that had guided every earlier decision had given way to quiet reflection. No one raised their voice. No one celebrated. The evidence was now speaking more clearly than any argument ever could. As Inspector Monroe secured the final documentation inside his case, he informed both agencies that a formal review would begin immediately. Colonel Harper then turned toward Nathaniel. Sir, your ceremony has been delayed, but Fort Liberty is ready whenever you are. Nathaniel glanced once across the parking lot before calmly replying. Then let us finish today's responsibilities the same way they should always begin, with the truth leading the way. With every statement recorded and every piece of evidence secured, the atmosphere inside the shopping plaza changed from uncertainty to quiet professionalism. Inspector David Monroe carefully locked the final storage device inside his secure case before speaking with the senior police supervisor who had just arrived from headquarters. The Department of Defense Inspector General has completed evidence preservation, he said calmly. Your department now has everything necessary to continue its administrative process with a complete record. The supervisor nodded in agreement before turning toward Officer Daniel Mercer. His tone remained respectful but unmistakably formal. Officer Mercer, effective immediately, you are relieved from field duty, pending an internal administrative review. Please return to the station with me so the required procedures can begin. Mercer stood silently for a moment before giving a slow nod. He understood that the decision had not been based on assumptions or public pressure. It had been based on documented facts collected from every available source. No one argued. No one celebrated. The process simply moved forward exactly as professional accountability required. Officer Ryan Collins watched quietly as the patrol vehicles prepared to leave. Although the afternoon had become far more complicated than any ordinary traffic stop, he felt relieved that the complete record would now speak for itself. Before departing, the supervisor thanked Collins for providing a careful and accurate statement. Your responsibility is always to the truth, he said. Collins answered without hesitation. Yes, sir. Nathaniel Brooks observed the exchange with the same calm demeanor he had maintained since the beginning of the encounter. He walked toward the supervisor and extended his hand. I appreciate your department's willingness to follow the evidence wherever it leads. The supervisor accepted the handshake respectfully. General Brooks, today's events do not represent the standards we expect from our officers. We will examine every decision carefully. Nathaniel nodded. Strong institutions earn trust by correcting mistakes, not by pretending they never happened. Several members of the crowd quietly lowered their phones. Many had expected anger or dramatic confrontation after Nathaniel's identity became known. Instead, They witnessed measured professionalism from every person involved. The lesson unfolding before them had become far more meaningful than any argument could have been. Inspector Monroe then spoke briefly with Colonel William Harper to confirm that all required documentation had been transferred securely and that Fort Liberty had adjusted the ceremony schedule to accommodate the unexpected delay. Harper thanked him before approaching. "Nathaniel." "Sir, transportation is ready whenever you wish to depart." Nathaniel glanced once toward the parking lot where the encounter had begun less than an hour earlier. The flashing patrol lights that had first drawn the attention of strangers now seemed far less important than the quiet commitment to accountability that had followed. As Mercer entered the supervisor's vehicle to return to the station, he looked back only once before the door closed. There was no dramatic exchange of words between the two men. Nathaniel simply acknowledged him with a respectful nod, demonstrating the same dignity that had defined every moment of the afternoon. The convoy from Fort Liberty then prepared to depart, leaving behind a parking lot that slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm. Yet everyone who had witnessed the encounter understood that the story was not ending there. The evidence would continue its path through official review, the department would complete its investigation, and the consequences of every decision made that afternoon would soon become clear. Nathaniel entered the waiting vehicle without triumph or resentment, focused only on completing the mission that had brought him to Fort Liberty in the first place. While the truth continued moving forward exactly as it always should, one verified fact at a time. Less than an hour after leaving the shopping plaza, Major General Nathaniel Brooks arrived at Fort Liberty, where hundreds of soldiers, military families, civilian employees, and community leaders had already gathered for the leadership ceremony. Although the schedule had been adjusted because of the unexpected delay, no one complained. As Nathaniel stepped from the vehicle, Colonel William Harper quietly informed him that every guest had chosen to wait. Nathaniel thanked him with a simple nod before walking toward the auditorium with the same calm confidence that had carried him through every moment of the afternoon. Inside, the audience rose to their feet in respectful applause. Most of them knew only that an unexpected situation had delayed his arrival. Very few understood what had actually happened on the road leading to the installation. Nathaniel approached the podium, paused for a brief moment, and looked across the room before beginning his prepared remarks. He never mentioned the traffic stop. He never mentioned Officer Daniel Mercer. Instead, he spoke about responsibility, humility, and the importance of serving others with integrity regardless of rank or position. Authority, he said, is never measured by how much power we hold over another person. It is measured by how faithfully we protect the dignity of every person we meet. The audience responded with quiet applause, unaware that those words carried far more meaning than they appeared to. During the following week, the administrative review continued exactly as outlined by department policy. Body camera recordings, patrol vehicle footage, dispatch communications, witness videos, and written statements were carefully compared in chronological order. Every piece of evidence supported the same timeline. Nathaniel had cooperated fully from the beginning. His identification had been valid. His answers had remained truthful and respectful throughout the encounter. The police department later released a public statement confirming that Officer Daniel Mercer remained off active patrol duties while the formal administrative process continued. Department leadership also announced additional training focused on professional decision-making, objective evidence evaluation, and respectful public interaction, emphasizing that maintaining community trust required accountability as much as authority. When members of the media eventually asked Nathaniel whether he wished to comment publicly, he answered with the same measured voice that had become familiar to everyone involved. "Strong institutions do not become stronger by hiding mistakes," he said. "They become stronger by learning from them with honesty and professionalism." His statement quickly spread through news broadcasts, military communities, and civic organizations across the country. Many people who first watched short recordings of the encounter later searched for the complete story and discovered that the most remarkable moment had never been the arrival of military vehicles or the confirmation of Nathaniel's rank. It had been the quiet discipline of a man who refused to let another person's assumptions change his own character. Several weeks later, Officer Ryan Collins received a handwritten letter delivered through official military channels. Inside, Nathaniel thanked him for remaining committed to the facts even when circumstances became difficult. Collins carefully placed the letter inside his desk drawer, deciding that it would remain there throughout his career as a reminder that integrity often revealed itself through ordinary decisions made under extraordinary pressure. As for Nathaniel Brooks, he continued serving the United States exactly as he always had, traveling without seeking recognition and leading with quiet confidence rather than personal attention. Long after the headlines disappeared, one lesson remained. Uniforms could represent authority, titles could reflect responsibility, and positions could command respect, but genuine honor would always belong to those who chose truth over assumption, fairness over prejudice, and dignity over pride.